Hello, my name's Laura and I'm here at Cats Protection in Hazelmere. Today I'm here with Ted. Ted was a stray cat. He didn't have a home of his own, he was living outside and he's a little bit shy, so at the moment he's hiding here in his cat castle and I'm not going to disturb him in there. I'm going to let him decide whether he wants to come out and see us. I hope he will, because once he gets to know you, he is a really lovely, friendly boy. And he's a really beautiful cat. He's also absolutely enormous, so I hope we'll get to see him, but we'll let Ted decide that. Today's story is this lovely book. It's called There's Something About Wallace, and it's the story of some swans on Hampstead Heath, and it's the true story of what happened with them during the lockdown earlier this year. So let's find out what happened. Almost 10 years ago, a majestic pair of mute swans, the newbies, fly in and set up home on the ponds of Hampstead Heath, moving from the bird sanctuary pond to Highgate No. 1 pond as the mood takes them. Deeply in love, they raise many cygnets together until 2015, when poor Mrs. Newby injures herself in a flying accident. A volunteer from the Swan Sanctuary in Shepperton takes her in to recover. 9 weeks later, Mrs. Newby is well enough to return to her mate and they live at the ponds together until 2016, tragedy strikes. Mr. Newby flies into a nearby block of flats and sadly dies. Mrs. Newby is distraught at the loss of her partner. She spends the next 4 years in mourning, patrolling the ponds, searching for her mate, Mr. Newby. Although various suitors turn up on Mrs. Newby's patch and try to win her affections, she chooses none of them and continues to live a solitary life on the ponds. She seems destined for the single life until 4 years later, in the spring of 2020, when something most unexpected happens. Monday, the 2nd of March. It's the beginning of March and there is all sorts of swan action going on at the ponds on the heath. A new pair of swans, the boaters, have arrived at the model boat pond. Tagging along with them is a cheeky cygnet called Concord, who's making trips over to Mrs. Newby on Highgate No. 1 pond to check her out. Mrs. Newby decides to see what Concord the cygnet is up to. She flies over to the model boat pond, where she is promptly attacked by the two newly arrived swans. Luckily, help is at hand. A Swan Sanctuary volunteer rescues her and takes her back to her own pond. Tuesday the 3rd of March. Naughty Concord the cygnet continues to be a nuisance by flying over Mrs. Newby's pond. She's getting increasingly annoyed with him. He's captured by a Swan Sanctuary volunteer and taken to a flock in the Lee Valley, where he can meet swans his own age. Friday the 6th of March. Mrs. Newby is missing. After a frantic search, she is finally found in the reed beds of the model boat pond, where she is safely captured and taken back to her own pond. Sunday the 8th of March, a report reaches the volunteers that Mr. Boater has flown into a tree and has injured his wing. For their safety, the boaters are taken to the Swan Sanctuary for treatment. Sunday the 15th of March. The model boat pond is clearly a desirable residence in a prime location, as no sooner have the boaters been taken to the sanctuary than a brand new pair of swans, called the Honeymooners, arrive and take up residence. Partnered, but too young to breed properly, they nonetheless start a bit of territorial mischief with poor Mrs. Newby, chasing and harassing her. Wednesday, the 16th of March. Mrs. Newby is missing again. The locals search all of the ponds, but there's no sign of her. Everyone is worried. Has she left the heath altogether after the harassment from Concord? Or have the honeymooners evicted her? Or has she come off worse in a 2 versus 1 battle? Friday the 20th of March. Meanwhile, a family whose house lies close to Hampstead Heath have heard a scratching sound coming from their roof. The attic is searched, but nothing untoward is found. They begin to wonder if a bird is stuck in the flue or if a squirrel has somehow managed to get into the loft. The family have even arranged for pest control to come and investigate the strange noises. On the third day, the owner of the house goes out into her garden and looks up at the roof. She can't believe her eyes. She sees a swan. Could it be Mrs. Newby? The Heath's rangers are called, and after a heroic effort, they manage to bring the swan back down to safety. She's checked over by the sanctuary volunteers, and it is indeed the missing Mrs. Newby. Although she has no injuries and seems to be in fine fettle, Mrs. Newby is admitted to the Swan Sanctuary for the weekend. She's had no water or food for 3 days, and after the chaos of the last few weeks, she needs a period of rest and recuperation. The plan is to pick her up from the sanctuary on Sunday to take her back to her home on Hampstead Heath. But that isn't going to be as straightforward as hoped. Sunday, the 22nd of March. Sunday has arrived, and it's time for Mrs. Newby to leave the sanctuary and go home. But when the sanctuary volunteer tries to pick her up, a large male swan by the name of Wallace prevents them from leaving by standing in the way. Introducing Wallace. Wallace was originally from Waltham Abbey. He'd been admitted to the sanctuary after a territorial fight in January. When he was examined, the poor swan also had 2 fishing hooks in his throat, which was surgically removed by the skilled veterinary staff at the sanctuary. He's convalescing when Mrs. Newby meets him. It seems that Wallace has seen something in Mrs. Newby, and there is something about Wallace that has caught Mrs. Newby's eye. Well enough to leave the sanctuary, and with no mate waiting for him back in Waltham Abbey, an on-the-spot decision is made to take them both to Hampstead Heath. This is risky. There's no guarantee they'll stay together, or even stay in Hampstead. Mrs. Newby and Wallace are popped into the back of the car, where they settle down happily and chit-chat away. Monday, the 23rd of March. The UK lockdown for COVID-19 begins, and we all have to stay in our homes. We're allowed out once a day for a daily exercise. Back at Highgate No. 1 pond, there's a definite hint of love in the air as Mrs. Newby and Wallace are seen swimming happily together. The swans need to be checked every day. A local newspaper is contacted and an article appears looking for volunteers to monitor Mrs. Newby and Wallace to make sure they continue to settle in. Luckily, as we are allowed an hour of exercise outdoors each day, there is soon a troop of swan watchers reporting in on a daily basis. So instead of Waltham Abbey as his lockdown location, Wallace is now on Highgate No. 1 pond on Hampstead Heath with his new mate, Mrs. Newby. Tuesday, the 7th of April. Mrs. Newby and Wallace's love affair is flourishing, and instead of territorial battles, they are seen mating and building a nest. Will she start laying eggs? And there they are. And here they are, building their nest. It's there on the pond. Friday, the 17th of April. The nest is finished. A report comes in from one of the Swan Watch volunteers that 3 eggs have been seen on the nest. Over the next few days, the swans continue to mate and, we hope, lay more eggs. Thursday, the 23rd of April. By Thursday there are 7 eggs. Mrs. Newby is sitting on them. She started incubating her eggs, and when she needs breaks to feed, Wallace will take over. The countdown starts. The eggs are due to hatch at the end of May. Sunday, the 31st of May. All the eggs have hatched. Bang on time, 7 cygnets are spotted on the nest. Mrs. Newby and Wallace prove to be very attentive parents. It looks like the cygnets are going to be well looked after. Monday, 1st of June. Mrs. Newby, Wallace and their 7 cygnets are spotted on the water. The cygnets The Cygnets are hale and hearty, and their parents are looking very proud. There is much excitement on the heath as the good news spreads, and pretty soon the story becomes a national headline. And there's a lovely picture of them with all their cygnets. The first 2 weeks of their lives, our cygnets need to watch out for herons, gulls, crows and pike. This motley crew lurk in and around the pond looking for an opportunity to snatch a cygnet or duckling. Fingers crossed the cygnets make it, as they'll face many threats in the first few weeks. But the heron and his sneaky friends have Mrs. Newby and Wallace to contend with, who keep a watchful eye on their brood. "6 weeks old. Safely through the first weeks, our cygnets are growing bigger by the day. Mrs. Newby has been showing the cygnets how to find food. The cygnets are learning to forage as they dip their heads under the water to locate some tasty morsels. Monday, the 13th of July. Tragedy strikes. Mrs. Newby is critically injured while protecting her brood from a dog in the water. She's suffered a very nasty dog bite to her wing. The wound must be treated urgently and she needs antibiotics. The Swan Sanctuary volunteers arrive with kayaks to rescue her, and Mrs. Newby becomes increasingly distressed. With all the commotion on the pond, Wallace is torn between protecting the cygnets and caring for his mate. The sanctuary volunteers attempt to catch her, but after several unsuccessful hours it's decided to try again the following day. Mrs. Newby is finally rescued and taken to the Swan Sanctuary. She's found to have a deep wound to her fighting knob, the wrist joint in her wing, but fortunately she has no puncture wounds to her body. In the fading light, Mrs. Newby is now safe and sound at the sanctuary, but it's been heartbreaking to part her from Wallace and the little ones. Thursday, the 16th of July. Good news! Mrs. Newby's bandages are taken off and the vet is keeping a watchful eye on her. She's well enough to be moved to a larger pen with other injured swans. Meanwhile, back at the pond, Wallace is turning out to be a fabulous dad. He's not left the cygnets alone since Mrs. Newby was injured, and they are all flourishing under his watchful eye. 8 weeks old, the cygnets are growing up fast and learning all about becoming graceful swans. They're growing their first feathers, which are light brown. Monday, the 3rd of August. It's 3 weeks on from the dog attack, and Mrs. Newby is coming back home. The entry to the pond where Mrs. Newby was attacked has been fenced off, and the pond is now safer. Her injury's been healing well, and the vet discharges Mrs. Newby from the sanctuary. From the other side of the pond, Wallace doesn't recognise her. Thinking she's an intruder, he rushes towards her with his feathers up. Realising his mistake, he is overjoyed to see her. The two swans are happily reunited, and the cygnets join in the celebration. Saturday, the 15th of August, 4 weeks later, and Mrs. Newby's wing is fully recovered. Three months old, the cygnets are now almost as big as Mr. and Mrs. Newby. 4 months on, and summer's end. It's the end of the summer. Children are going back to school, and our cygnets are flourishing. They will have many adventures ahead of them, not least of which will be when their parents decide it's time for them to leave home. In the coming months, our cygnets will reach many milestones. At 5 months old, our cygnets will begin their flying lessons. At 7 months old, our cygnets will be as big as their parents. Between 9 and 10 months old, Mrs. Newby and Wallace we'll decide that the cygnets will need to move out and find friends their own age. Our Hampstead Heath cygnets will join a flock of other young swans. After a few years, we hope they'll find love and, with their partners, fly off to territories of their own to raise a family, just like Mrs. Newby and Wallace. So I hope you've enjoyed today's story. I will put the link where you can get this book in the description. For every book sold, a donation will go to the Swan Sanctuary in Shepperton. I think Ted's enjoyed this story, and I'm glad he's come out to see us. So you've got to see this really lovely boy. I've got my next book ready and I look forward to bringing it to you soon. Bye for now.